All right, kids, chop chop. I got better things to do today than give away all my trade secrets to use mugs. So episode number 1 in segment 6 of vetting buyers without a realtor. We're going to hopefully give you some context on different buyer profiles and kind of how to empathize, how to put yourself in that buyer's particular shoes and understand their situation, which will make it easier for you to figure out where to bend, where to compromise, what questions to ask, and how to really make a genuine connection with this buyer and make sure you get to the finish line with that buyer. So first, let's talk about what sort of buyer profiles there might be, and there are innumerable buyer profiles, but let's take some of the larger ones, right? First-time home buyers, second home buyers, growing families, the unfortunate reality of shrinking families or older folks that may be looking to downsize, people who are doing relocations. They've got a new job and they need to move across the country or into a different state or town, municipality, whatever the case may be. Investors, both new and tenured. All of these different buyer profiles have different unique needs, expectations, timeline constraints, and it's important for you, again, to sort of use that empathic node in your brain to make sure that you're thinking like these buyers when you're trying to choose which buyer to ultimately get in bed with. So let's break it down a little bit. Let's talk about each one of these buyer profiles and what they might be expecting or needing. So first thing we mentioned was first-time home buyers. Closing cost assistance is generally a big deal for these folks. FHA borrowers, we talked about this in previous episodes, and we're going to talk about it again when we go on to understand the financial capability of these buyer profiles, so don't get your panties in a bunch. But people using these sort of lending products typically are putting down the smallest amount possible to keep either cash in their pocket or because they just don't have cash, period, to put down larger down payments, and they're just getting by with what they can. These folks don't have a lot of extra capital is the plain understanding. And if they are asking for closing cost assistance, again, a concept we've mentioned in previous episodes, they're saying, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, can we please roll my closing costs into my loan so that basically the bank is paying for the closing costs. So, I'm going to offer you $300,000, but I need $7,000 back in closing cost credits, so net to you is only going to be $293, but please accept my offer. It might seem at first blush for you as a seller, like, why would I ever give somebody $7,000 back off my property sale? I may have better offers. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but it's important, again, to understand this buyer's unique set of circumstances so that you're not thinking to yourself, this person's just trying to get one over on me. Why would I give $7,000 back to them? It's not a wool being pulled over your eyes. It's a need. These people may not be able to actually float the transaction at all unless you're giving them closing cost assistance. So maybe that FHA buyer is offering you a really, really high price, but you got to give something back. You got to bend in a couple of places. That's where you may have to bend to attract this buyer to sign a contract with you. Growing families. These folks are going to be interested in the local schools, community amenities, demographics, all of these sorts of things. Not necessarily for you to prove to them, but maybe they have questions and you're reticent to answer. Well, I don't really want to give you my opinion on the local school. I haven't had a child in this school system since blah, 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 blah. And back then, things looked like this. Maybe you say, well, really, I can't speak to that, but here are some resources you could look at, or maybe ask your buyer's agent if they can bring up some statistics on the local school system to satisfy your curiosity. Again, putting yourself in that buyer's shoes, trying to get them the answers they need to make them or help them become the best buyer for you is probably the right path. Moving on to shrinking families, folks looking to downsize, older folks who have maybe sold a home and have a bunch of extra capital to put down on your home, but they're offering you a lower price. But obviously they're going to be able to get the loan that they're after, where some of these other buyers may not. You're putting yourself in a situation where you need to consider why they'd be offering you less because they're putting up half of the purchase price and a down payment to get their loan. Unequivocally that this buyer is going to get their financing from that bank and taking that into consideration. They also may be thinking about repairs and certain items that may need to be upgraded to satisfy their occupancy of this home. There are certain safety items that an older person may want to really be able to occupy, and they're asking you as a seller to implement that. Some extra handrails or whatever the case may be. Bending where necessary to, again, attract this buyer, if they are the buyer for you, is a big deal. Investors, they may have questions about local rents and what you feel they may be able to get for this or that property. Obviously, this is part of their due diligence, not necessarily for you to answer, but maybe you, as a person who is tenured in your neighborhood, you've been living there a long time, maybe they don't have a buyer's agent. They really want to buy your property. They want to make the best offer. You're negotiating with them to get them to the best offer. These investors, sometimes they're offering cash or cash-like lending products like hard money loans, which are effectively cash to you as a seller. We want them to be the best buyer for you if you can get them to the highest price. And maybe you got to answer this question for them. Maybe you have to find some resources to help answer this question. You get the idea. Each one of these buyers are going to have their own unique set of questions and needs. And while we're talking about questions, it's now up to you, because you don't need no stinking realtor, to ask questions of everybody involved in this transaction to make sure that these are or are not the right buyer for you. Just because they've offered a great price and maybe they got the right lending situation that you're after, doesn't mean that this will all actually come to fruition. So get on the phone with the loan officer. What sort of lending product are they after? If it's FHA, but you don't want FHA, do they have the finances to actually go to a conventional product? But you would never know that unless you asked. The loan officer themselves, how many transactions have they done in your municipality? How many transactions have they done in general? How long have they been in the business? Are they a mortgage broker or a mortgage lender? Do they hold their paper when they issue a loan? Do they keep that loan, or are they selling it on the junior market? All of these things will impact your decision as a seller on how strong you think this loan officer is and how strong you think this buyer might be. If this buyer has a buyer's agent, same questions. We as real estate professionals, having direct experience with most of the other real estate professionals in the industry, we know, like if I'm getting an offer from Jack or Jill agent that I've done business with many times before, I have absolute hard knowledge that this person would definitely make sure they coach their buyer to not incur any new debt once they've been pre-approved for a loan, or it could potentially sink the entire transaction. You may not have that information as a seller. Ask. Have you had this conversation with your buyer? Does your buyer understand that their loan to debt ratio, their income to debt ratio is very important, and if they move the chains on their income to debt ratio during the transaction, it could sink the deal? Have you had this conversation with them? Talking again with the loan officer, as we described in previous videos, have you run this buyer through a desktop underwriter? Have you corroborated all the information that they gave you for their initial pre-approval? Have you seen liquid assets? Have you looked at bank statements? Have you reviewed any outstanding debt payments to some other debt holder? Any alimonies, child support? These are all questions you need to ask, and you need to get direct answers to really understand these buyers. You kind of get the idea. If you have questions about it, leave them down below, and we'll do our best to answer them for you. Now, this isn't the whole picture. We need to go further into the financial capability of these buyers and the reliability of everybody else involved. But those are second episodes and third episodes in this series. We'll get to that in just a minute. We'll see you there in a few. Peace.